Hey everybody, it's me, Jack, and welcome to my final review in my Star Wars review series. We're looking at Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, the first Star Wars spin-off. Rogue One was a movie that I was very confident would be good, mainly due to the fact that The Force Awakens was really good, so I got pretty excited to see it. And when I did, it was pretty good as well. The film takes place shortly before A New Hope. It tells the story of how the rebels were able to steal the plans to the Empire's weapon, the Death Star. A group of rebels led by Jyn Erso, the daughter of Galen Erso, one of the people who created the Death Star, leads a mission to find the secret plans and get them to the rebels. Rogue One is certainly a very different kind of Star Wars movie. It doesn't have some of the things that the other Star Wars movies have. There are no Jedi, there's no lightsaber duel, there's not much use of the Force. This movie is very much a war film, with a lot of blasters and space battles. Let's acknowledge the elephant in the room. Yes, there is no opening crawl to this film, and honestly, I don't mind. It shows that this is a different type of Star Wars film. It's not part of the episodic series. And I still understood what was going on. Something that I was a little bit less a fan of was the fact that they show the names of all the planets that you see in the film. That's something that they usually don't do in Star Wars. The film still manages to feel like Star Wars and feel like it takes place in that same galaxy. There are a lot of visual callbacks and some nicely placed cameos. My definite favorite is the cameo by Walrus Man and his buddy from the Cantina in A New Hope. We get the return of the Death Star, and we get to see it in even more detail. I love that this film actually shows just how small the Death Star really is. Granted, in A New Hope, they kind of made the Death Star look bigger compared to the planets to symbolize the power of the Empire. But here we see that the Death Star is still a small space station, and it works for this film because it's just been made, and the Imperials don't know how powerful it is yet. All the planets in the film are new ones, and for the most part, they look pretty interesting. Granted, we do have another desert planet. However, we also have a raining planet with mountains. The final battle of the film takes place on a planet that has beaches that kind of helps with the whole war angle. It reminded me of Saving Private Ryan. What about the characters? Well, the characters of this film are definitely good, but as many people have pointed out, there definitely could have been more to them. Jyn Erso is our main character. It's nice that with both her and Rey, we're getting more main female protagonists in the Star Wars films. As a child, her father was taken away from her and her mother was killed. Now granted, people do complain about the fact that we see her as a child and then we just cut to years later when she's an adult. We don't really get to see much of her training. Now this criticism I do agree with. I think we could have spent more time with her as she's becoming the powerful rebel. To be fair, people do forget that for the longest time this is how Batman was. It wasn't until Batman Begins where we actually saw his origin. In all the old Batman comics, cartoons, and movies, all we know is that his parents were killed and then he became Batman. Her character starts out not on the rebel side and just out for herself. She doesn't want to get involved with the rebellion. All she really wants is to get her father back, and that's the only reason why she goes on the mission in the first place. Granted, there is some good development with her character. Her father eventually dies, but she still doesn't give up and ends up actually helping the rebellion steal the plans. We also have Cassian Andor. Now, this character has also been criticized for not having much of a backstory, but in his case, I think it works. Sometimes less is more. Sometimes a character could be even more interesting when there's a bit more mystery to them. His character seems very cold and ruthless. When we first meet him, he ends up shooting his informant. His character doesn't necessarily want to do this, he's just doing this for the good of the rebellion. He follows his orders no matter how awful those orders may be. He's ordered to kill Galen Erso, but in the end, he actually can't, as he sees that Galen Erso is a good man who sticks up for his workers. The only real backstory that we get for his character is that he was in this war since he was 6 years old. But that's all we really need. From that moment on, we understand his character. He's never really had a life. He's just spent most of his time following other people's orders. This does also add a little bit more dimension to the rebellion, that they aren't just a group of goody two-shoes. They can still do some bad things, but it's what they think is for the greater good. We also have the characters of Chirrut Îmwe and his friend Baze. These two characters are a delightful duo. Chirrut Îmwe is a blind man who believes in the Force, but isn't exactly a Jedi. Despite this though, he's still a badass. Baze, on the other hand, is just a guy with a gun, who believes the Force to be a bunch of nonsense. There's a nice parallel here with the original trilogy. Chirrut Îmwe is like Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Baze is like Han Solo. The definite standout character of this movie is K-2SO, who might be my favorite droid in the Star Wars franchise so far. There's so much good humor with his character, and he even mixes in a little bit of sassiness as well. His character constantly speaks his mind, which leads to some really good jokes. How about the villains of this movie? Well, the main antagonist of this film is Director Krennic, and he is a very weak villain. There isn't really much to him. He's just sort of your typical evil British admiral. Plus, his character constantly gets pushed around, not just by Darth Vader, but by Tarkin as well. So he comes off as much less threatening. Also, there could have been a lot more conflict between him and Jyn Erso, considering that he killed her mother and took her father away from her. Granted, at the end of the film, it seems like there's going to be a climax. He aims his gun at her, but then he just gets shot from behind by Cassian. It's a really cheap way for his character to go out. Now, there's another interesting thing that they could have done with his character. He constantly gets bullied and pushed around by his superiors. So why not, at the end, he just lets Jyn Erso and the other rebels go? Not because he wants to help them, but because he wants to see the plans of Darth Vader and Tarkin fail. That would have been an interesting conclusion to his character. But no, he just kind of remains a very boring and standard villain. We also have the return of Tarkin, and yeah, because Peter Cushing died, they had to replace him with a CGI Tarkin, and it's pretty distracting. It still is very good CGI, but it's still very distracting because, well, you can still tell that he's not there. He looks like someone out of a motion capture film. Granted, the actor that they got to do his voice is very good. He sounds a lot like Peter Cushing, but that CGI, yeah, it's really, really distracting. On top of that, I don't really understand why he needed to be in this film at all. It's not like he's a very interesting or important character. Why not just cut him out completely and put Darth Vader in his place? Darth Vader is the guy that we come to see, and sadly, he really isn't in this film much. Now, granted, I do understand what they were doing. They didn't want his character to hijack the film and distract from the other characters. But god damn, it would have been so awesome to see even more of him. I mean, he is just as awesome as ever in this film. James Earl Jones might be much older, but he still is amazing as the voice of Darth Vader. The scene between him and Director Krennic is a really good scene. One of my absolute favorites in the film. The idea of him having a castle on Mustafar was just awesome. I wish we could have seen more of that castle. We even have a nice little reference to Empire Strikes Back, with him taking a bath similar to the one that Luke took in Empire. And yes, let's talk about his pun. Just before he leaves, he chokes Director Krennic with the Force and says, "Be careful not to choke on your aspirations, Director." And yeah, that line is kind of corny. I'm gonna be honest though, James Earl Jones still managed to make it sound less corny than it could have. Vader appears again at the end in easily the coolest scene in the film, where he fights the rebel soldiers. It's the only time in the film where any character uses a lightsaber. It's a pretty epic scene. You got a choir chanting in the background, he's force pushing the rebels. It only lasts for like a minute, but it's still an awesome scene. Overall, the characters in this film are good. I don't think any of them are going to go down as some of the best Star Wars characters ever. Well, maybe K-2SO, but that's it. But they are still likable. The pacing of this film is one of its biggest problems. The first half of the film doesn't have much action or excitement. It's a lot of talking. Granted, there is still some interesting dialogue in there and some good drama, but it isn't as fast-paced or exciting as, say, Force Awakens. Granted, I love great dialogue as much as the next film buff, but in a Star Wars film, I do wish there would be a little bit more excitement. However, the last third of the film is where the film gets just awesome. There is so much great non-stop action, as well as one of the best space battles in the entire series. We get some very emotional death scenes as well. The best is definitely K-2SO's. He just simply says, "Goodbye," and then he's destroyed. It's amazing that the most emotional death scene in the film is the one that comes from the droid. And I do like the idea that all the main characters die, but in a sense they do still complete their mission, as they do get the plans to the rebellion. It's a nice way to end the film. Overall, this is a good film. I don't have as much to say about this film as the other films, truth be told, and that's just mainly because this is a good, fun Star Wars movie. There isn't that much about it that really sticks out, like some of the other films, but it's still a good, worthy addition to the Star Wars series. I'd give Rogue One a 7 out of 10. So that's it for my Star Wars reviews. Thank you guys so much for watching them, and may the Force be with you.